Okay, we're going to get started now. If I can get your attention. Hey, well, good morning, and thank you all for being here. We are going to have a 3-hour program discussing the census. Why are we here today? It's April 1st, 2025. The census is in 3 years, so everyone asks, why start now? But we're hoping to answer that question in the course of the next few hours. I'll talk a little bit about it after our welcoming remarks, and we'll have a few sessions to do a deep dive into the census, what happened in 2020, what's going on now, and how to plan for the future. We're going to start with a few welcoming remarks. The first one, I'd like to welcome Vinny Alvarez, who is the president of the New York City Central Labor Council, to say a few words, and also to thank the president for helping sponsor this event.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everyone once again. Thanks so much, Jeff, to your work here. This is your 6th go at this? Yeah, we were talking about that. It's a lot of experience that Jeff brings to this effort, and look forward to working with you over the next 5 years. Of course, to New York Law School, thanks so much, and to Council Member Julie Menon, who we've worked so closely with on a whole host of different issues, including the 2020 census. It's great to see you, and I appreciate all your efforts in the past and as we move forward here in the future. And to our CLC team who's with us today working on this, thanks so much as well. I would just say this real quick. The labor in 2020, you know, the CLC, we're a large organization. We were very actively involved in the 2020 census. We represent 300 unions from each sector of our economy, from the public sector, from the private sector, and from the construction trades here in the city, as well as collaborating with working people throughout the city. Collectively, in the 5 boroughs of New York City, that's over 1 million workers. So it's a lot of people that we reached out to, certainly in 2020 with our labor counts, Census 2020 Complete Count Committee. And organized labor, you know, we thought then, and we continue to think now, that we're uniquely positioned and situated because we reach out. We have an audience of members that we reach out to on a regular basis. We have a culture of engagement and activism that I think lends itself to really being beneficial with an effort that takes place with the civic engagement and the outreach which is needed for to have an effective census and making sure that we're counting everybody. And we work constantly, of course, with partners and allies on a whole host of different worker-related issues and the census, previous censuses as well. Folks at the Consortium for Worker Education that we work closely with on educating our members about these issues, as well as all of our different affiliates, many of who are here today, so it's great to see you. I'll just reiterate what we all know is the importance of getting the census, having an accurate count and counting it and reaching out to as many people as possible. The effort was enormous during COVID and during the pandemic 5 years ago, when we had also deliberate attempts to try to undercount some communities. But we worked hard to overcome them, and we did a phenomenal job. For all the folks that thought we were going to lose 3 seats in Congress, it was really remarkable to land where we landed, in just 89 persons short and shy of not losing any seats. So it was a great effort, and it was all in part because of the work that all of you did. The funding and the political power that is necessary to represent New York's interest and working families in New York is really at stake here. In order for us to when we get a complete count, that helps us in that effort. So the return on our investment here and over the next 5 years will be fully worth it. So we will do our part. We're going to do everything we can to reach out to working class households, to immigrant households that we have a relationship with on a regular basis. And we're going to do it working with each of you and make sure that we could do our best to count every household here in New York. So once again, thank you, Jeff, and thanks everybody. Thank you, Councilmember Menon, and everybody for being here today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Moving along, I think as you all probably know, Congress and the state legislature are in session today, but we do have welcoming remarks from leaders, members of both the U.S. Congress and the State Assembly. So our first guest welcome via video will be with U.S. House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
Good morning. Thank you, Dean Kroll, for that wonderful introduction and for your leadership of this incredibly important institution of legal education. To New York City Labor Council President Vinny Alvarez, thank you for your advocacy on behalf of workers across our great city. And to my good friend, Council Member Julie Menin, thank you for your tremendous leadership on the issue of full participation in the census, and for your work in the City Council to bring to life the office of the census to make sure that every single New Yorker is counted. The census is more than just a numerical count. It is a comprehensive record that determines whether or not our neighborhoods get the elected representation that we deserve, get the federal funding that we deserve, and that our communities get its fair share of resources in areas like housing, healthcare, education, transportation, and infrastructure. Billions of dollars are at stake for our city, so it's never too early to start thinking about how we can ensure that every single New Yorker and every American is counted in the 2030 census. I salute everyone who is here this morning and the leadership of the New York City Central Labor Council for all of your work to bring together our communities, the resources, and making sure we can get the representation that our neighborhoods deserve. God bless each and every one of you. God bless our great city, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
I'll say thank you, Leader Jeffries. Our next presentation, welcoming remarks, will be from someone relatively new to New York government, Bronx State Assemblyman Landon Days, who represents part of the West Bronx. Assemblyman Days has been in the Assembly now just about a year. He won a special election in 2024, and he discovered the census as an issue that he has become an overnight, as we call them, a census warrior. Assemblyman Days has taken the lead in Albany to co-sponsor legislation to create a census office I'll get into in my remarks. He's trying to obtain funding in this year's budget, officially late as of today. And he is in Albany and wanted to be here, but obviously with both the budget and session couldn't. So we'll have a short presentation from Assemblyman Landon Days.
Hi, I'm Assemblymember Landon Days of the 77th District of the Southwest Bronx. I want to say I'm sorry I can't be there today. I'm currently in Albany championing for the same thing, the census. Similar to City Councilwoman Julie Menin and law professor Jeff Weiss, I'm also a census champion. I'm going door to door, community to community, and to anyone else who will listen to me speak and talk about the census and why it needs to be a top priority for New York. So for everyone in that room right now who's out there championing for the census, I say thank you. The census is a part of our democracy. It's a part of who we are as Americans. And most importantly, we need to ensure that the state of New York takes the census seriously, and we ensure that every member of our society is counted. Because of champions like you, and champions like Julie Menin, and champions like Jeff Weiss, I promise, as our great state, the Empire State, the Big Apple, can be a leader when it comes to the census. So thank you to everyone who is celebrating National Census Day on April 1st. Yes, it might be April Fool's Day, but everybody knows that the census is nothing to fool around with. We have to work hard, we have to be coordinated, and together we can do a good job. So thank you again. My name is Landon Days of the 77th Assembly District, and I'm your census champion. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll get into the program. President Alvarez mentioned this is my sixth census cycle. Not to date myself, but my first round was 1980 when I was working for the Speaker of the State Assembly and tasked with working on census and redistricting. As a result of the 1980 census, New York lost a record number of 5 congressional districts. That is the largest loss by any single state in American history. Nothing you'd ever want to have to survive again. And with the work effort that many of us put in 2020, we narrowed that loss to only 1 district by 89 people short in 2020. 5 years ago was Census Day. April 1st is the day the census is officially taken, although it takes several months, of course, to get the job done. So we're at the halfway mark between April 1st, 2020, April 1st, 2030. 5 years ago, we did not have to deal with a citizenship question, but instead, and unexpectedly, we had the pandemic to deal with, which was a daunting challenge that we had to deal with that stretched the whole census process longer than we had anticipated. But New York, in New York City especially, planning, we had New York Counts, the statewide coalition, statewide. We had some limited state funding, disappointingly not the $30 million the state had appropriated, but a few million by the end of the summer when it was almost too late to spend it. So we learned a few lessons in 2020 to get ready for 2030. Having said that, excuse me, we are now back at the point of probably having a citizenship question in 2030. We're at a point now where the census is being threatened, being challenged. In the last 2 months alone, under the new Trump administration, we've already seen 3 major private sector advisory committees eliminated by the Census Bureau. We've seen the Census Bureau's website disappear information, put it back up again. Hard to know. Yesterday, a reporter called me to say, census.gov is down. What's going on? But I looked myself and it was back up again. Strange things are happening. Many of you were here at a conference we had on the American Community Survey in late January, and we had Census Bureau staff here. Right after that, Census Bureau staff travel has been shut down. So we are somewhat right now on our own. But not that we're lacking for any kind of resources, as you'll see over the course of this morning. We have a bill in Congress to limit congressional apportionment to account of citizens only. We have a court case in Louisiana filed by 4 states, West Virginia, Ohio, Louisiana, and Kansas, seeking to limit the reapportionment of congressional districts among the states to citizens only. So we're already seeing the threats to the census, and we think it important to have kept the 2020 coalition that we had together moving forward, and with groups like the New York Immigration Coalition, the New York Community Trust, the New York Civic Engagement Table, and others who are in this room, we've kept a core group active to prepare for 2030, and that effort will be expanding and ramping up rather quickly, and today, for New York City purposes, is a precursor to that. In 2020, we had New York Counts organized. We went throughout the state and got into as many hard-to-count communities as possible through education, training, and outreach programs. And let me recognize Mita Ananda's here from that effort. Just say hello. Mita has graduated to now coordinate the national census effort out of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And thank you for being here. In today's world, a New Yorker hasn't left New York, but she's gone national. So what we're going to look at now are the kinds of things that we need to be doing for 2030. And we lost that 1 congressional district by 89 people, 1 subway car, as they say, and that seat went to Minnesota, which had an excess of 20 some odd people. And when you least expect to have a cough, you have it. So pardon me for that. I'll only be a few more minutes. So what we're looking at now are a several step effort. The first is going on now in legislatures. In Albany, Assemblyman Days is co-sponsoring Assembly Bill, I think it's 6894, with Assembly Deputy Majority Leader Michael Salages. That legislation would do three basic things. One, it would create an Office of Census Services within the Office of Secretary of State. Second, that office would then staff a New York Counts Commission comprised of 30 people, all of whom have to have had some background and experience as a census veteran, so that we're not simply looking at having a DMV or a state agency put out flyers, but have a state complete count outreach effort that's made up of people like yourselves who've been through this effort before. And third, the bill would authorize funding for grants to be made to not-for-profit community organizations and academic institutions to do census outreach, education, and training. That bill is not going to pass right away, but there is an effort now being led by the Assembly members and also in the Senate by Senator Jeremy Cooney of Rochester and Leroy Comrie of Queens. Oh, thank you. To provide some funding in the state budget. We were asking for $2.5 million. I think 1 million might be a realistic goal, but anything will help count. We're also looking to engage you all in working with the hard-to-count communities in the city to begin to, really getting into why are there some communities that never reach the 50% mark in terms of response rates throughout the summer and early fall of 2020. To begin, we're not looking to have you go out tomorrow and say, the census is 5 years away from now, get ready, please respond. It's to find out why through barbershops, through bodegas, through local organizations that can reach out to communities about the census. We're going to have a citizenship question in all likelihood. We don't know what else to expect yet in terms of budget cuts and limited resources from the Census Bureau. We've heard that the administration might want to farm out the census to the Postal Service, which in itself they want to reform. So we have to expect the unexpected and begin organizing early now. My goal would be to have the census as every day is morning coffee and Rice Krispies, that the more you can get people to understand the census, not that it's coming in 5 years, but that you can learn about your communities, the education, the businesses, the health, the environment, all the different things that places like the Census Bureau and the New York City Planning Department's websites offer. So we're looking at engaging you early now. We're going to be expanding the New York Counts Coalition. For those, since you all registered to be here, unless you object, we're going to add you to our weekly mailing list for the New York Redistricting Census and Election Law update that I put out through New York Law School, so you can keep up with things, and we'll be back in touch as time moves along and expand our coalition. Today's program will basically consist of several different segments. You'll next hear from Councilmember Julie Menon, who directed the 2020 New York City Census effort. She'll be followed by Joe Salvo, the retired chief demographer of the New York City Planning Department, who is probably the best census numbers cruncher analyst that I know. Joe, thank you for coming down for this today. Joe will be followed by Joel Alvarez, his successor as Director of Population at the New York City Planning Department. And then our last hour will be spent, Lucia Gomez of the New York City Central Labor Council, who's a co-sponsor of this event, will lead a panel discussion with several people on what they did in 2020, what they're doing now, and how to prepare for 2030. And we should be wrapping up sometime around noon. So at this time, I'd like to bring up Councilmember Julie Menon. She and I co-authored an op-ed in today's New York Daily News, which summarizes the last 5 or 6 minutes of what I just said. So I just urge you all to take a look at that, and I'll probably send it out since I have your addresses on our mailing list. So thank you all very much, and Julie Menon.
Good morning, everyone. Well, Thank you so much, Jeff, first of all, for that kind introduction. And I really want to thank you and New York Law School for hosting us today. And I want to thank our other co-hosts, the Central Labor Council, and particularly its wonderful president, a longtime friend of mine, Vinny Alvarez. And I really want to shout out Lucia Gomez, because the whole genesis for this idea really came from a conversation that Lucia and I had, actually many conversations over the course of the last year. Lucia is unbelievably knowledgeable about the census, and I had the honor of being able to work with her in 2020. And so we thought, we want to start now. And so we got very excited. And so now we're so thrilled, along with Jeff's partnership and all of you here today. So in walking into this room, I have to say, I feel like I'm at a census reunion. I mean, I think almost every person in this room worked on the 2020 census, just as I'm looking around. So it's really just fantastic to see all of you here. So I've been asked to talk about what did we do in 2020 and then preparing for the 2030 census. So I've got a number of slides. I even have some interactive videos. So I hope to make it interesting for all of you as we go through all of this. So I was honored to serve as a 2020 census director during what can best be described as extremely arduous times. So trust me when I say that conducting a successful census in New York City is an enormous undertaking, as we all know. In 2020, despite facing unprecedented challenges, we proved that with the right planning and the right preparation and grit and perseverance, and most specifically, the right partners, who are many of you in this room, we could produce outstanding results. We are here today to discuss those challenges and the strategies that we were able to employ to successfully navigate the myriad unexpected challenges that we faced in 2020. So given all of the obstacles posed by the Trump administration in 2020 and the unique role of our city as the epicenter, unfortunately, of the COVID pandemic, we were able to recover and rebuild after the pandemic despite the challenges because of our high participation numbers in the census, as well as our commitment to achieving those results with a strategic and equitable approach to the census. So now I'm going to hope, oh, perfect, this is working great. So if we want to match or exceed the results of 2020, what do we need to do? We need to start right now. We're 5 years out from the 2030 census. It was no accident that we picked today, April 1st, to do this. We're literally 5 years out. April 1st, as we all know, is Census Day, so we thought it was very fitting to have this event on this day. So one of the key takeaways from the last census is obviously we need to start planning now for 2030. The stakes are simply too high, with some in Washington already circling above with legislation and mandates intended to derail funding and representation to those who don't fall in line with their policy proposals. In New York, we simply cannot afford to lose representation or resources. Obviously, and I know you all know this so well, an undercount would have devastating consequences for our city's future, for education, for childcare, for healthcare, even Homeland Security funding. A lot of people don't know actually depends on how we do on the census. So public safety, which always polls at the top of polls right now, is also at risk in terms of the census. And the census is not just a snapshot in time. It's a static picture. It's also a predictor of trends, and it's the foundation for billions of dollars in federal funding for vital services such as the ones I mentioned, as well as hospitals as well. According to research conducted by the GW Institute of Public Policy in fiscal year 2017, as much as $1.5 trillion worth of funding is it really at stake, representing over 309 different federal programs, was distributed based at least in part on the census data. So challenges to the 2020 census. One of the biggest hurdles that we faced in 2020, there's so many, so it's always hard to just say one, but there were many, which I'm going to go to, is the fact that New York City has historically had hard to count areas, which are, of course, neighborhoods with high concentrations of immigrant populations, as well as certain communities, the Hasidic community, as one example, very difficult, hard to count, strong distrust of government, as well as traditional vulnerable populations. This, of course, predated the pandemic, but was, of course, exacerbated during the pandemic. And so also the administration at the time attempted to undermine trust in the census for everyday New Yorkers. We all know, and obviously Jeff was talking about it, but we all know about the attempts on the citizenship question, where the Trump administration, for the first time in 70 years, added a question to the census: are you a U.S. citizen? And we know what that was about. That was an attempt to instill fear in immigrant communities. In addition to serving as the census director, I also served as executive assistant corporation counsel at the New York City Law Department, in large part because I wanted to work on the citizenship case. That case was led by our New York Attorney General, but the City Law Department, we were co-plaintiff on that case. And I think it was very important that the city played a role in that, because it was absolutely critical that we fought back in terms of the citizenship case. So now we know what is happening with the Trump administration. Once again, they are trying to suppress the count in blue cities like New York. How are they doing that? Jeff mentioned a couple things. First of all, they have a bill in the House to add a citizenship question on the census. So even though we won that case at the Supreme Court, they have yet another bill to do basically the exact same thing. But they're also doing more insidious things. They disbanded the volunteer census committees that are basically utilized as models to help to organize a count this far out from the census. So they basically disbanded them. And then, and I found this to be really one of the most shocking, the Trump administration is threatening to move the census from the Commerce Department to the U.S. Postal Service, and literally use mail carriers as census workers. This is one of the most bizarre ideas I have heard, and it would have devastating consequences on New York City if that were to happen. And that is why we are here today, because we want to prepare for the 2030 census. Okay. So adding to the challenges in early 2020, COVID obviously erupted at the same time that the census was kicking off in mid-March. The first day that the census was happening in 2020, I was supposed to board a bus with Reverend Al Sharpton. We had a census bus. We literally had this massive bus. It was wrapped in all this census gear, and we were going to communities all throughout the city to talk about the census, and particularly to focus on hard-to-count areas. And on that very day is when the city shut down due to COVID. It became very clear that we had to pivot very early in terms of our census strategy. We had and I'll give one example of that besides the census bus, we had a multi-million-dollar ad buy to do subway and bus ads. We were able to claw that back, get that money back, and pour it into other areas such as phone banking and texting, so that we were reaching New Yorkers where they were, which were largely at home, since using traditional subway and bus ads and signage in public spaces was not going to be as effective. We knew that people were at home, and so we had to clearly meet them where they were. 2020 was also the first census that was conducted online. So that posed another unique set of challenges, either for people who were not comfortable filling out the census online, or for the third of New Yorkers who lacked access to broadband. So our census office made the decision prior to when COVID hit. So in 2019, we made the decision to give a grant from our office of $1.4 million to the New York Public Library System to basically utilize all 217 public library branches as intake centers where people could go and fill the census out. Since if you look at polling on libraries, libraries are considered one of the most trusted voices in New York City. So we definitely wanted to partner with them. Unfortunately, once COVID hit, we then had to use that money with the libraries to instead do more phone banking, more texting directly from the library branches instead. So we know that many COVID-related challenges, we hope that they will not be the same issue in the 2030 census, but nevertheless, we know that the unexpected can happen, and we need to be building the momentum and the strategies now. We can't afford to build the plane as we're flying it, which is basically what we had to do in 2020. And the political climate is, quite frankly, too charged and will not allow for us to just be doing that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what specifically we did in 2020. So we can gain invaluable insight from our success in 2020. I do want to say in New York City, we finished #1 on the census of all major cities across the country. And that is thanks to the incredible partnership that we had here. So we created media outreach campaigns that spoke directly to historically undercounted communities. And I do just want to make a note of that. And I remember the 2010 census. I was chairing Community Board 1 in Lower Manhattan. So in this neighborhood, I was a community board chair. And I remember someone from the federal U.S. Census came to one of our community board meetings and they droned on and said, fill out the census. It's your civic duty. No one listened. No one paid attention. And in 2010, we did have a very poor self-response rate. And so when I became the census director, I thought about it and I thought, how do we make the census interesting? How do we make it exciting? How do we motivate people to fill out the census? And to me, it is about making sure that people understand that the census affects your everyday life. It affects the funding for your local school. It affects your local hospital. All of these different programs, the 309 federal programs I referenced earlier, they all depend on how we do on the census. And so the whole gist behind the marketing campaign was to get that message across about the census and to make it impactful to everyone's daily life. And so we did that through a thorough analysis of groups and neighborhoods we identified as being susceptible to undercounting. And then in partnership with demographic experts, Joe, you were so amazing. I mean, I can't thank you enough for everything that you did on all the past censuses, but certainly on the 2020 censuses. So partnering with the Department of New York City Planning was absolutely critical to our success. So we focused on building strong community partnerships. A U.S. Census Bureau released a study in June 2019 that predicted that New York City's self-response rate for 2020 would be 58%. So again, in 2019, well before COVID, that's what the U.S. Census Bureau was saying, that our self-response rate would be 58%. So we knew our work was going to be cut out for us. Key to our success was reaching more than 7 million New Yorkers via text, encouraging and facilitating participation by all New Yorkers, the phone banking, the media campaigns, all of what I'm about to discuss. But most important were our partners. So in addition to the Central Labor Council, which I mentioned, we had a number of other partners which are critical to our success. So we basically focused our census outreach on 4 pillars, each of which delivered exceptional results as we pivoted to reach New Yorkers where they were during a pandemic. So we had we partnered with 157 groups. We had a $40 million budget. We gave out almost half, $19 million to various groups that were the trusted community voice on the ground. I do just want to say this was extremely difficult to do. For anyone that is familiar with the city's procurement process, giving out money takes an inordinate amount of time. We partnered with CUNY so that we could very quickly get this money out the door to the groups that were the trusted messengers on the ground. As I mentioned, we gave to 157 community-based organizations. We also had a Get Out the Count field campaign. So we sent over 7 million texts reminding New Yorkers to complete the census. We did 4 million calls reminding them to complete the census. And actually through our ad campaign, over 1 million New Yorkers directly clicked on, because all of our digital ads, we embedded the link so you could fill it out, because we wanted to, again, make this seamless so people could really do this. Okay, and now I'm going to move on to our media campaigns. So hopefully people saw our media campaigns. I think they did have a lot of reach. We did 34 media campaigns in 27 different languages. And I'm going to talk just for a minute about that. So let me just, well, before I get to the media campaigns, labor count. So Central Labor Council, as I mentioned, was our partner in this, representing over 300 labor unions in the city. And they were absolutely incredible. I just highlighted a couple of the unions and what they did, but I could give you 100 examples of what various unions did. So really led by the CLC, they helped us to reach doing member-to-member contact with their labor counts committee. And so each of the members of the over 300 unions that represent the CLC were contacted numerous times to fill the census out. And it really made an unbelievable difference in our ability to reach New Yorkers. Okay. So now I'm going to switch to the media campaign. So we took a very unorthodox approach to this. As I mentioned, like when in 2010, the comments I heard about the census are, Census doesn't matter to me. Census is super boring. It's very wonky. Why does it matter? So I really wanted to try to shake that up a bit. So we used a number of messengers to reach people on the census. So I'm now going to play you 4 PSAs that we did that really highlight some of the reach that we had. So we're going to play a PSA from Cardi B. We did one in English and one in Spanish. Alicia Keys, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. Again, we're trying to reach a big demographic. So from a Supreme Court Justice to Cardi B, and then Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Lin-Manuel Miranda. So hopefully this will work. Oh, oops, sorry, hold on. How do I, do you know how I play this here? I'm gonna have you, do you know? Sorry. Give us 1 minute. There are 4 in a row. I just want to make sure I'm doing this.
Play with the mouse.
Oh, here?
It's right here.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Great.
Cardi B here to talk to you about your civic duties in 2020. Your community's future is in your hands, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next decade. The 2020 census decides how much power, money, and respect our city gets. In past censuses, Black and brown communities have been undercounted and unseen. The census is for everyone regardless of immigration status. Mi gente presente. Go to my2020census.gov now and fill out 10 simple questions to get counted.
Okay, so this ad had enormous reach, unbelievable reach. So I just wanted to play that for you. Okay, now hopefully this is going to work with the next ad. Okay, sorry, I just need, sorry, it didn't go back to the next one. Give us a minute. For some reason, it went to YouTube. We have 3 more in here. Sorry,
Yes.
I just need to go to the next one. Thank you. Oh, great. Okay, I might have you stay up here. This one, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Now more than ever, it's super important that every New Yorker counts. The COVID-19 pandemic is affecting us all, but it's affecting our Black and brown communities the most. And the only way to get the programs and the funding that we deserve is to fill out the census. It only comes once every 10 years. It's only 10 simple questions, and by law, your information cannot be shared. There are no citizenship questions on the census, so go to my2020census.gov and get counted.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Stephen Breyer. I'm a Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and today I want to encourage you to fill out your census form. That comes from the Constitution of the United States. It says that every 10 years, government will take a census counting the number of people, and a lot depends on it. How many representatives your state has in Congress depends on the answers to those questions, and more than that. New York has been going through a very difficult time with coronavirus, just terrible. And the amount of healthcare aid, of hospital aid, of emergency aid, of school aid for New York and for every other state depends upon the answers to your questionnaires. The information that you provide will be completely private. So please, help yourself and your friends and your neighbors and your family, your state, by answering the 10 questions on that questionnaire.
Go to my2020census.gov now.
And we have one last one.
The census is a count of everyone in the United States, no matter your immigration status. The census count is how our communities get billions of dollars for programs that we all rely on. Who here's filled out a census before? You in the back. Starting March 12th, you'll be able to do this online or even over the phone. Now let's go through some of the questions.
This looks easy. So the census asks, how many people live in your home? Do you rent or own? Everyone's name, how you're related, age, ethnicity, and home phone number. So me and my wife, we have 2 kids. I'm 40.
You get the idea. Your information is completely confidential. By law, it cannot be shared with anyone. The census only comes once every 10 years, and 2020 is our chance to get it right.
Okay, so I just wanted to give you a little sense of how we tried to shake things up with some of our media and outreach and advertising, and I really think that was an effective strategy. Okay, so now we're going to go to the results of the 2020 census. So, and I know Joe will probably talk about this as well, but New York City had a record population of over 8.8 million, the best results since we've had since 1950. The self-response rate. So remember before I said the Census Bureau predicted that we would have 58%, and that was pre-COVID. They had no idea that COVID obviously was going to hit. We hit a self-response rate of 61.9%, surpassing the national average and most other major cities across the country. 3 boroughs exceeded the 2010 response rate, so Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. And more than 470,000 New York City households, representing no less than 1.23 million New Yorkers, were counted or directly assisted as a result of our campaign. 87% of 245 neighborhoods were within or at least 5 points above their 2010 rates, and that's with the challenges around the citizenship issue and COVID. So in essence, we counted an additional 600,000 people in 2020, leading to an additional $1.8 billion extra per year for a decade. So that I think really was an outstanding result, and thanks to all the collaboration of all of you in this room. Then, in addition, we have a slide on this. I want to talk about the congressional seats. So, there were these headlines about the 89 people that weren't counted, and there were all these inflammatory headlines. Oh, if 89 more people were counted, we wouldn't have lost a seat. It's not really the right way to look at it. Since 1950, and I know you spoke a little bit about this, Jeff, every single decade, New York State has always lost a minimum of 2 congressional seats. And in 1980, 5 seats, but always no less than 2. In 2020, it was the first time in 70 years that we did not lose 2 seats. We lost 1, and we came within 89 people of losing 0. So it was the best result we've had on the congressional seats since 1950. So next steps for New York. So you heard a little bit at the state level about legislation that Assemblymember Days has. So I introduced a bill in the City Council last week to create a permanent office of the census. Yes, thank you. And we have to do this. This office, basically what this would mean is it would require the mayor 2.5 years before the census to create a permanent office of the census, to bring on staff, to do public outreach, so that we are not in the situation we were in 2020, because we know that the headwinds in 2030 are going to be just as strong. I should say that it's estimated that we will lose 2 seats statewide, 2 congressional seats, and some estimates say we could lose up to 4 congressional seats, depending, of course, about if some of those cases that Jeff mentioned, such as the Louisiana case, if they succeed. Because if it is true that they succeed and that undocumented individuals are not counted, it will be disastrous for New York City. So I, again, want to sound the alarm about how important this work is. So I look forward to our bill becoming a law. I think how you can help is please help spread the message about this city council bill. We want to create some pressure and momentum. Please use social media, talk about this bill. We've got to make sure that it gets to the finish line and it passes. So, and that's really, I think in terms of, I know we're going to have a panel on the next steps, but in closing, I would just say that I want to once again thank you, Jeff, for your partnership. Vinny, Lucia, thank you to the CLC. Thank you to all of you for caring so much about the census and for being partners with us. And we need to join forces now to do the hard work it's going to take to make sure that New York City gets a proper count. There is too much federal funding and congressional seats on the line for us to be complacent. We have to start now, and we have to build the momentum now. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, and thank you for helping New York increase its population by over 660,000 people in 2020. That was certainly remarkable. Our next speaker will be Joe Salvo, formerly of the New York Planning Department. Also, I'd like to ask each of our speakers from here out in the next panel just a word of introduction about yourselves if you think there's something that the audience should know about. So now I bring you Joe Salvo.
Okay, I'm Joe Salvo. I was the former director of the Population Division at the Department of City Planning. Depending on, I kind of have, this is kind of my sixth, maybe 5.5, carrying New York City through the decennial census. I'm kind of tag teaming with my successor, Joel Alvarez, today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the basis for the decennial census. We've heard a lot. Councilmember Menon provided us with a good overview of what was done in 2020 regarding getting people to respond. I'm going to talk about the foundation for all that response, It's going to get a little bit wonky. I promise not to get too wonky. But in reality, the 2030 census begins in less than 2 years. Okay. That is because of an operation called the local update of census addresses. There are 3.5, Joel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, approximately 3.5 addresses, housing units in the city of New York. And all of them have to make it to the list. If they don't make it to the list, then you get people to respond, that everybody has to have an address. Okay, how do I do this? Let's see. Oh, it's the wrong one. It's Joel. Okay. Joel, I could give you a talk if you want, but I want to go back just for a moment to 2000. Okay, that's me. That's it. Yep. No, that's it. Yep. That's it. Okay. All right. We've heard now multiple times from Professor Weiss and from Councilmember Menon that the census is now, and I want to reinforce that in a major way in my talk. This is the New York Times page from 2000. When I look back on the work that we all did at Department of City Planning, this is a very important time for us because this is the first time the city officially crossed the 8 million mark. In reality, with undercount, it was probably a few decades earlier, but officially in the record books, this is the first time we surpassed the 8 million mark. And the primary, or one of the big reasons why we did, was because of the work that was done to fix New York City's address list. And you see in this article, and that's no exaggeration, we provided at the time to the Census Bureau 370,000 housing units they didn't have on their list. If you go back to 1990, the city was undercounted by more than 250,000 people. And after the 1990 census, legislation was passed, and I'll tell you about that now, that provided us with the ability to work on the address list using the decennial census. So it goes without saying that the address list, as you can see, is the foundation of the census. If your housing unit's not on the address list, it is likely that you'll be missed. Why? Because you'll never get materials. You'll never get a request to respond. The Bureau does update the list. They use Postal Service data twice a year. They have the surveys, the American Community Survey that many of you know about. And those interviewers report back. And then there's input from the data user community. But time and time again, what we have found is that those updates don't work very well in places where addresses are not standardized, where they are, some people call them hidden, some people call them non-traditional, some people call them, I guess what we can say is they don't have the standard identifiers that basement apartment, for example, where a letter carrier comes in and puts the mail in a hallway and people sort the mail on their own, including the person in the basement apartment. So there is this program called the Local Update of Census Addresses, the LUCA program. It's an operation. It is direct. What you give or what the local government gives to the Census Bureau, okay, has a direct impact on the list of addresses. It is the really only program where the local government can have a direct effect. Now, obviously, all of the outreach that you've heard about is very, very important. But without a good list of addresses and without a list that's informed by the local government, frankly, outreach will come up short because you will not have the housing units. Every person that's enumerated has to be in an address recognized by the Census Bureau. So the other thing is LUCA is optional. Historically, LUCA started in 2000. The Local Update of Census Addresses program was created through legislation in 1994. The first year it was incorporated into the census was 2000. New York City benefited greatly from that operation. In 2000, 2010, and 2020, the percentage of local governments, about 40,000 nationwide, that participate in LUCA has remained in that 20 to 30% of the total. It hasn't budged. And what's happened essentially is that places like New York that make major investments, over time, we continue to add and continue to participate, while other governments, frankly, are not participating. So let me give you some of the results nationwide from 2020. 16.4 million housing units were added to the address list nationwide. In one way or another, 79% of those made it into the census enumeration. And 3.2 million were totally unique to the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau, 3.2 million housing units they did not know about. So LUCA, the operation, improved the census, not only by providing addresses that were unique, but providing complete geographic information. I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. In cases where geographic information was missing, let me give you an example. We put up a building on the west side of Manhattan or in a new development in Texas. And the Census Bureau doesn't have that address, doesn't have that range of addresses. Think about the west side of Manhattan. You put up a big apartment building and it extends the range, the numerical range of a street. And they don't have that extension of the numerical range. So they have a building, they don't know what to do with it because they don't know where to put it. So the locals come in, as we did in 2010, and said, wait a minute, we know where that is, and it's here, and we give them the address. And as a result, in one case, 600 or 700 apartments made it in that might have been excluded. So there is this national working group that I lead. It is an effort to demonstrate the importance of LUCA to advocates, to funders, to tribal, state, and local governments. Our group has technical experts. One of them is in the room. Two of them are in the room. Joel Alvarez and Steve Wolkowitz are involved with our group on behalf of New York City Planning. And then we have messaging experts, people who will take the knowledge that we've gained from the 2020 effort and pass it on to people so they can see why it's important. And what we've done is we've built a series of what we call success stories. One of them is for New York, to try to demonstrate why this operation is so important, so basic, so fundamental to success in the census. And we're going to be hosting webinars to try to get governments more involved. There is a subtext here, and I'll come right out with it, tell you what it is. More and more governments are becoming aware of this operation. In the past, not so many governments were aware of it or took it seriously. but more and more are. Let me give you some examples from 2020. This is the result of work that we did with the Census Bureau. Every government, when they submit addresses to the Census Bureau will come back and say, well, we took your addresses. We're going to put them into the census. We took 70% of your addresses. They show you which ones they took. But what they never tell you is how many of them actually made it in to the census and had a direct effect on the count for your jurisdiction. So what we did as part of this national group that I'm working with is we gave the Census Bureau some examples from various parts of the country, and we said, could you go look and tell us what actually happened? And that's what I'm going to show you now. The first is New Orleans, all right? I don't have to tell you, New Orleans is the epicenter for climate events, for catastrophic events involving climate change. And the geographers in New Orleans made a submission in 2020. And this particular area is public housing in New Orleans that was flooded out. When we did our evaluation of what happened in New Orleans as a result of Luca, what we found out was that there are parts of New Orleans where a quarter of the addresses, a quarter of the 2020 census count of housing units was the direct result of the submission they made in this operation, which is huge, especially for a city that obviously is subject to climate events. This was the result of Katrina. After 2005, New Orleans started to build back. Past 2010, 2012, 2013, the housing, believe it or not, it took all those years to get that housing back into the housing stock. And for one reason or another, the Postal Service didn't pick it up. So the locals did, and they submitted it, and the result was a better count. This is Hidalgo, Texas, which lies, Hidalgo County, Texas, which lies on the Texas-Mexican border. And it is heavily rural. The areas around it are known as colonias. When we went and we examined some of the areas in this county, we took a look at what the submission was, and it turns out that literally certain places in this county would have never even made it to on the map, wouldn't have had counts if it wasn't for the operation that this county conducted. New Mexico, tribal area in New Mexico, Pueblo, that again, work with the state to try to get addresses. The tribal nation worked with the demographer, the chief demographer in New Mexico, to get these housing units on the map. Because again, without field work, without local knowledge, you would never even know these were here, okay? So what we found was, again, places in this tribal area that made it because of Luca. Fresno, California, migrant farm workers. Accessory buildings, very, very important in this neck of the woods. There was extensive field work done by nonprofits working in cooperation with the county government in order to get these on the map, in order to make sure they made it. And as a result, they had a significant impact on the counts for these local communities. And then lastly, I'll offer you one more local that you're going to hear more about in Joel's presentation. And this is Co-op City in the Bronx, where address confusion can really be a problem. We tend to think of missing units as those units in the basements, and correctly so, accessory buildings, correctly so, but we frequently don't think about units hiding in plain sight because of confusion over address configurations that are repeated in different buildings. Again, devastating impact on the count if you don't recognize this locally and tell the Census Bureau about it. All right, now, you just heard before, we have to prepare. The census is now. It literally is now from the standpoint of the address work. And you'll hear more about this in a few minutes. The things that we can do now, all right? People have to take this operation seriously, and here's why. New York is involved in a national competition. Pure and simple, how can I put this? We benefited in New York by the fact that Texas made little or no investment in their census preparation work. We benefited from the fact that Florida didn't do a great job, okay? But what's happening is that many of these places are now recognizing the power of this operation and are starting to divert or put funds into activities to support this operation. And again, this operation begins in less than 2 years. The first part of this operation begins in early 2027. And right now, the preparation for that period of work has to begin. And I want to say that consciousness has been raised about this nationwide. And a lot of jurisdictions, Texas felt they should have gotten 3, probably right. Florida probably should have gotten 3. They didn't get it, in part because of their hostility towards some of their own residents, right? Now, people don't understand that when you add a citizenship question, or you threaten people with a citizenship question, it has an effect in these other places, too. But people are starting to recognize this. There's this operation in Texas called the Texas Census Institute, run by 2 very good people. And they recognize that the LUCA operation is the key to bringing Texas a better outcome in the next census. So what I'm trying to say is we have to really step up because the rest of the country is likely to do the same. So learning about the nuts and bolts of the operation, there's going to be national and local LUCA training, a bunch of it being done by the working group that I'm part of, working with the Census Bureau. The assessment has to be done soon, this year. I think it goes without saying that New York City is going to participate in LUCA. But there are places outside of the city that may or may not participate. There are tools right now to help you figure out whether it's an investment you want to make or not. So I'm speaking really now not only to New York City, but to many of the jurisdictions outside of New York City. And then you have to create a plan, okay? And what that plan looks like is you come up with your data, you figure out what are the areas that are real problems, and you focus on those areas, okay? That is the best thing you can do to prepare for this operation. Remember this, LUCA is optional. There are 2 phases of this work, both take place in 2027. You have to sign a confidentiality agreement. All the information you provide to the Census Bureau is confidential. Working with those addresses is confidential. Summer, late summer into the fall, likely early 28, the actual submission gets made. This is fully 2 years before the actual enumeration. And the work needs to begin now to do this. So you have a confidentiality agreement you have to sign. You have to accept an invitation from the Census Bureau. Stakeholders outside of local government can help by lobbying, I'm sorry, don't use that word, by promoting resources for the locals so they can do their job, all right? So they can participate. But the obvious question that I want to put out here and maybe discuss later on is a lot of this relies on local community support in an environment where we have serious problems of trust now. The governments that are going to do well are the governments that can get the locals, their residents, to believe that this is going to result in a better census. One, it's a fact, as I've demonstrated, that if you participate in this operation, you're going to do better. And the ability of a local government to muster the will and the trust of its own residents to participate in this is going to be key. Because there are going to be a lot of governments doing this now, this time around. Like I said, we're in a bit of a competition. New York needs to step up and needs to step up soon to begin this process, which again takes place in 27. So think about this. The address list work is in 27, fully several years out from the actual enumeration, but it is the basis for everything that gets done in the actual enumeration, all the materials that get sent out, all the follow-up that gets done. So I'm going to stop there. I thank you for listening. This is my email address. Anybody who wants to contact me who's interested in this. But again, thank you, and I hope we can muster up one heck of a response when it comes to these operations and ultimately to the census itself. Thank you. Oh, so do we have time for a couple of questions? Anybody? Yeah.
You mentioned that we're in a certain political climate. In this environment right now where federal government is even telling local law enforcement to work and identify immigrants, they're doing things, all kinds of things.
Right.
And whether or not, like, it's gonna be really hard to convince women. But is there any guarantee, I mean, can we see or be like, it's not gonna happen because we have people in the government who are not really following the Constitution laws. So how do we act? Or what can we say?
That there are elements in the federal government that want to cancel you. And we need to fight back. That pure and simple. There are people who in the federal government, we all know this, who want to extinguish certain groups of people. And I know of no better way to do that than by purging people from the very statistics that bring us the benefits that we deserve and the representation we deserve. So my response has been, we have to push back. We have to find ways to push back. And there are multiple ways of doing that. 2026 is not that far away, okay? The danger is that people will hide and will essentially hand those people at the federal level what they want. And that's the most frightening prospect. So that's what I would say. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry? No, go ahead. Yeah.
Where the Census Bureau rejects, 50% of the addresses of New York City submits because of
Well, the good news is that by and large, and Joel will tell you this, that the Census Bureau has accepted virtually everything we've given them. And what they do reject, we can go to an appeal. There's an office specifically geared towards appealing addresses. The documentation has been so good that these actually exist that we haven't had a problem with that. Some places do if they throw spaghetti at the wall and don't do their homework. Then they deserve not to have those addresses. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So can community boards have any role in this LUCA process?
That's a really good question. I have to tell you, I will pass that one on to Joel after his talk, because the answer is generally community boards, yes, do play a role, because the people on community boards are generally very knowledgeable about pockets of housing that need to be recognized, but also they're in a unique role of being able to convince people that it's okay to come forth. But it is.
I could definitely see us playing a role to educate the community.
Right, so that they don't freak out. So they don't freak out when the field staff from the Department of City Planning starts poking around, walking the streets. It'll probably tell you that in 2020, we walked thousands of blocks. I mean, in the city. It's pretty, yeah.
So continuing on the community board theme, in terms of the addresses, obviously new construction is one area where there may be addresses that are missed or confusing. How does the community board identify those? How do we know what to try to identify? How do we know where to try to add to?
Well, I don't want to take away Joel's thunder, but there is a process for actually identifying new construction as a separate entity and submitting it to the Census Bureau. City planning tracks that, and that would be the way to go.
So that's new construction. What about existing or old? Part of my district includes Chinatown, which has labyrinthine areas where there's housing, but it may not be on somebody's list. How do we make sure that gets counted?
Well, you communicate with the department about it, and they'll tell you about what's being done to try to get people in the field in these areas to try to identify this. Yeah. All the way in the back.
The Census Bureau address list built independently of other government databases. Is it updated with information from state and local databases like voter files or info?
It's primarily, up until 1990, the Census Bureau created the list from scratch every decade. After 1990, because of the legislation I told you about, and also because of the American Community Survey, which started in the mid-90s, the Bureau needed to have an address list on a continuous basis. The primary updates, just about everything, relies on the Postal Service files twice a year. There's additional information that they're thinking about using, but it's really a Postal Service thing, more Postal Service update. And what they learn when they go out in the American Community Survey and they can't find a house, or they find a house, then they report it back and it gets added to the list. Yeah.
Hi, so just in light of your statement about the fact that co-work center with local government are involved, a reminder, a note of context when Governor Cuomo sat on those census that was rolled out and just making sure that we in this room are mindful of and remembering the mistakes that we undermine what could have been more like not including Black-led and Latino-led organizations in the conversation. There were many moments where there was a lot of breakthrough. And vitalization was about why that going forward, we have a precise, clear, and what census organizing is going to look like, particularly in light of everything. Frankly, you say the wrong thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is frightening, for sure, right? But just as frightening for me, I think for everybody in this room, is if the city gets shorted in a major way and we don't get what we deserve and we lose those seats, that precious political representation. So this is a tough one. Really, I mean, it is a very tough thing. All right, I'm going to stop. I'm sorry? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Joe, and thank you for the questions. For the rest of the session, if you have a question, please identify by your name, and if you're here for the organization, let us know. I apologize that we don't have microphones in the audience for that. We are recording this event, so if you are going to ask a question, please be as loud as you can without yelling. Before we go on, I'd like to introduce the Commissioner of the Office of New York City Immigrant Affairs, Manuel Castro. Thank you for joining us this morning. Okay. Okay, our next speaker will get into more of the weeds on New York City census issues. Joel Alvarez of the New York City Planning Department.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeff, for inviting me and organizing this important event. We're supposed to say something interesting about ourselves. So I'm Joel Alvarez. I'm the director of the Population Division at New York City's Department of City Planning. And up until recently, I served on one of those census advisory committees until it was discontinued by the Secretary of Commerce. Okay, so a few weeks ago, my office published a report showing how, according to the Census Bureau's estimates program, New York City recently reached a population of 8.5 million. So I think some of you have read about this. Have you heard about it? 8.5 million. Okay. Well, that was a substantial rebound after pandemic losses. And this is something that everyday New Yorkers can relate to. If you're riding subways, navigating our streets, or searching for housing, you can feel that growth. But that statistic of 8.5 million, reflecting our lived reality, is not simply a given. It's constructed by looking at changes after the 2020 census enumeration. So our latest estimate is built on top of the 2020 census base. But imagine if the census had missed 500,000 people. Then we'd be mistakenly talking about our recent rebound up to 8 million, rather than the much more realistic 8.5 million. Such an error would have reduced our federal funding by billions of dollars, as Julie had mentioned earlier. And of course, it would have reduced our political representation, and we'd have to live with the consequences until the 2030 results were released. We avoided such a scenario in part because of the incredible organizational outreach encouraging New Yorkers to respond to the 2020 census. But as Joe Salvo discussed, we also achieved an accurate 2020 census through New York City's effort to update the Census Bureau's address file. That impact was profound, and today I'll tell you more about that effort here in New York and how successful it was. Can advance. Oh, good. Okay. I'll start with a retrospective showing you like details about how our address process works. A little wonky, yes, but I'll get into the weeds a little bit. And then I'll talk about the results, reviewing how the agency's 2020 efforts helped ensure New Yorkers would not be missed. And I'll wrap up with a brief overview of the challenges that we currently face and what we're already doing to achieve an accurate count in 2030. Okay, so first, let me try to demystify our somewhat wonky 2020 address update process. All right. I hope this is interesting to see that map up there, not glazing over. All right, so city planning simply lacks the resources to visit every building in New York City. We can't conduct our own mini census. So to conduct address research before the 2020 census, we developed a targeting system, prioritizing high-yield areas where efforts could be most impactful. To do this, we examined data from local administrative sources like the Department of Buildings certificates of occupancies and address data from private vendors. And we simply identified areas where it looked like the Bureau's address file was well below our estimate. Before the official start of LUCA, when we were given confidential access to the census address list, that happens just a few years before the decennial census, we had to target whole blocks by comparing our block counts against those periodically published by the Census Bureau. After the start of LUCA, we fine-tuned our targeting, identifying specific buildings where our housing unit counts were higher. In mid to low density areas, we conducted a lot of field work. In higher density areas, like in much of Manhattan with large buildings, we primarily conducted in-office assessments of targeted areas, examining aerial and street view imagery and other data sources to make our conclusions. Okay, so Joe mentioned our work in Co-op City. I'll say a bit more about it to demonstrate how census errors can be hiding in plain sight. It's shocking to think that that can happen, and how our in-office review process can help resolve them. So if you're not familiar with Co-op City, it's a set of modernist high-rise apartments. You can see it when you're taking the Amtrak train north out of the city. Construction was completed in 1973, and it hasn't changed since. Yet, between 2000 and 2010, the census erroneously reported a sizable housing decline. So for our 2020 in-office review, we studied tax records and building plans showing apartment unit identifiers for each floor in Co-op City buildings. And we uncovered 300 units that were missing from the census address list. These were submitted through LUCA, and the Census Bureau has confirmed to us that these were ultimately enumerated in 2020. They confirmed talking with Joe's organization just recently. But you can see the results right here in this little table that I've shared. In an area with no new construction, the census count of housing units jumped from under 4,300 in 2010 to over 4,600 in 2020, thanks to our submission. All right. I'll use another Bronx example in the Castle Hill area to illustrate our process of in-field canvassing. Situated right next to the East River, Castle Hill is mostly 2 to 3 story apartment houses. When conducting field research here, we encountered many indicators of hidden, hard to enumerate housing like extra mailboxes, and extra doorbells and basement entrances and converted garages and extra side entrances. These indicators of distinct housing units gave us address counts that were independent of the Census Bureau and local administrative sources. And in Castle Hill, we found field counts that were well beyond the Census Bureau's. One big challenge when we have these informal units is that they occasionally lack separate formal unit designators like apartment 2R or 3B. It's not ideal, but in such circumstances, we had to manufacture our best guess for unit designators. And based on the feedback that we received from the Census Bureau's Geography Division, again, Joe's organization, we know that we were able to successfully enumerate hundreds of these missing informal units in Castle Hill. And that successful field work, that success story in Castle Hill, was replicated all across New York City. By the time that we had completed our LUCA update process, our team had visited over 100,000 lots We had canvassed 5,223 blocks, conducting research in every corner of the city. And the lesson learned is don't compete against city planning in any step challenge. No, seriously, the lesson was that city planning put forth a Herculean effort, and this work was incredibly impactful in its contribution to a complete count. In the end, City Planning's 2020 LUCA operation was able to document over 122,000 addresses that the Bureau had erroneously omitted. We also corrected 59,000 addresses and deleted roughly 3,000 duplicate addresses. And the Census Bureau accepted virtually all of these, 99.99%, and that's really a testament to the quality of city planning's submission. We also participated in the Census Bureau's new construction program. I heard it was mentioned earlier. And that allowed us to update the census address list with the latest information on recently constructed housing. And cumulatively, through both LUCA and the new construction programs, city planning added a total of 265,000 addresses to the census address file. Conservatively, all of these additional addresses resulted in 500,000 New Yorkers being enumerated who might otherwise have been missed, helping us to avoid the bleak scenario that I described earlier, where our enumerated population and all subsequent estimates were severely undercounted. Okay, so that summarizes the overall citywide impact of our address update. But how did we do at a neighborhood level? This map answers that question. The map shows our address updates through both LUCA and new construction as a percent of all housing units counted in 2020. And we see that basically every corner of New York City benefited from our work. The city average was about 7% of enumerated housing that was attributable to city planning's update, with quite a few neighborhoods in excess of 10%, but hardly any areas where our additions amounted to less than 2% of the housing stock. Okay, so I know that many in this room know all too well that certain groups get systematically overcounted in every census, and certain groups get undercounted in every census. In the 2020 census, for example, the difference between the US's Hispanic net undercount and the white non-Hispanic net overcount was roughly 6 million. That's an error the size of Wisconsin's population. And that differential was almost 3 times what it was in 2010. So we have a real problem accurately enumerating certain groups. And in many ways, the problem is getting worse. But the local update of census addresses can help correct the problem. And we see that here with this map. I've taken the previous map showing our address updates as a percent of housing in each neighborhood and limited it to just neighborhoods with high Hispanic populations, so where the Hispanic population constitutes at least a quarter of the population. And we see such neighborhoods had substantial percentages of their housing stock accounted for thanks to our address update effort. And in fact, we uncovered 88,000 missing housing units in these neighborhoods alone that we made sure were added to the census files. While the 2020 census undercount assessments are not available for New York City, and we're never sure of the specific characteristics of the people living in the addresses that we submit, the fact that we had such an extensive submission in Hispanic neighborhoods, home to 3/4 of New York City's total Hispanic population, undoubtedly helped us combat the Hispanic undercount in New York City. The Black population was also undercounted nationally in the 2020 census. And similarly, our local address update helped combat this tendency here in New York. Again, when we limit the first map to just neighborhoods where the Black population constituted a quarter or more of the population, we see neighborhoods all with substantial contributions to our address file update. Collectively, they accounted for over 30% of our total submission, 80,000 units in total. And what's also notable is that these few neighborhoods comprise 4/5 of New York City's total Black population. So again, while we can't definitively say our local update of census addresses reduced the undercount of New York City's Black and Hispanic populations, we can say that much of our update focused on Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, areas encompassing the vast majority of the city's total Black and Hispanic populations. Okay, so now you've heard about our process and how it was successful. Let's now consider the challenges that we face in the lead up to the 2030 census. Historically, we've seen that economic and population pressures can spur the creation of hidden, low visibility housing, with people subdividing homes and converting garages, attics, and basements into informal dwelling units. These forces can shift quickly, as we've seen here in New York City, where we've gone from historically high rental vacancy rates in 2021 at the start of the pandemic to historically low vacancy rates by the spring of 2023. We've also gone from a complete cessation of international migration flows at the start of the pandemic to historic highs this past summer. At the same time, new remote work tendencies can heighten the demand for residential real estate. In short, we're facing housing pressures which will undoubtedly present new challenges in identifying hard-to-enumerate housing units. While the landscape of housing shifts, we have a LUCA operational timeline beginning a year sooner. So city planning has to start its work earlier. And so we're going to be conducting preliminary field work this summer. That's that assessment that Joe was talking about. So we're mostly going to do this to assess how the landscape has changed, but we're also going to do it to create a baseline against which we can analyze alternative address data sources. We'll also consider how we can better collect housing unit designators and take advantage of new technologies like machine learning to identify change. Regardless of technological advances, there's no replacing boots on the ground. So we're working hard to secure a budget for more field work so that we can replicate the incredible success of our 2020 census address update effort. I've mentioned a lot about the work of city planning and what we did, but it takes a village. Just like New York's incredible collaborative outreach effort, encouraging everyone to respond to the census, our address research has been aided by many over the years. We've received funding and funding support from the New York Community Trust. We've received address data support from Con Ed, StreetEasy, Rebney, and even 9X back in the day. And we've received staffing support from the Queensborough President's Office and the Mayor's Public Engagement Unit. If any in this room are interested in helping, I'd welcome the chance to think creatively about how we can collectively address the challenges of our upcoming 2030 effort. And with that, I thank you so much. If you're interested, here are links to our Population Division website and a report providing you more details on everything that I talked about today. Thank you. Yeah. Right. So the mechanism, what's happening behind, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay. No. I do expect to see more surprises in the lead up to 2030, even with long-established, unchanging housing. We have to do our due diligence. And I think places all across the country need to do the same, because you can't just trust that the census address file will have the information correct. What was the mechanism that took place? Because they had the right number back in 1990. So how did the Census Bureau all of a sudden drop housing units from something that was unchanging? I can't tell you the mechanism, but I can tell you that we have to be very careful to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so that's an important part of the work that we're doing in the office, to evaluate and look at these changes that are just, they don't have face validity. Okay, I'll put those two questions into two buckets. The second one, like a roommate living situation, that falls into the bucket of ensuring that people respond to the census. That is that outreach work that so many in this room did. And it's just knowing that everyone counts, everyone living in that situation needs to be counted. But in terms of the LUCA process or address update process, as long as they have their address, as long as the Census Bureau has the address, we're feeling good about your chances, right? And then it's up to the outreach effort to get them across the line to make sure that they respond to the census. Just 1 second, let me answer the second question. And when it comes to congregate settings, that's what we refer to as group quarters. And that is also, those addresses count for LUCA. So it's important that we make sure that the Census Bureau has an accurate understanding of all of these group quarters. And in fact, our office, after evaluating the 2020 census, found that roughly 1,400 people living in group quarters across New York City were missing from the 2020 census. They gave us the chance to challenge it, and we successfully challenged that. But we are already evaluating group quarters. We want to have a thorough list, and we started looking at that because we saw that there was an underestimate of people living in group quarters according to the population estimates program. So we've already reached out to our shelter system to make sure that we've got those addresses and those populations on our radar, and we made the Census Bureau aware of it, and that's part of the reason we were able to get up to 8.5 million just recently in the July 2024 estimate. I think it's a huge challenge for us, and they may be small populations relative to roughly 200,000 living in congregate settings across New York City, maybe small populations relative to our household population, but they're concentrated. And so it has a big impact on particular communities if they're missed. So we certainly don't want that to happen. There certainly is, yes. Well, I mean, we do our best to thoroughly check it. It is up to the Census Bureau to capture it in total. but the work begins early, where we're trying to build up our independent understanding of all of New York City's group quarters addresses. We have facilities database that gets periodically updated, and in the lead up, in the next year or so, we're going to start to thoroughly review that and concentrate on updating that. Okay.
Okay, before we bring up our next panel, I'd like to invite Mita Anand to come up to say a few words.
Hey, everyone. I bothered Jeff enough to be allowed to come up here, so hi. Great to be in a room with everyone again. Councilmember Menon, great to see you. Great to see Lurie, and I'm not going to name everyone one. So, okay. Just wanted to say a few, for those of you that don't know me, Mita Anand, I was the person that helped convene and facilitate New York Counts 2020 back in 2020. And as a result of those efforts, I got mired in Census forever, and now I'm the Senior Director of Census and Data Equity at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. So just wanted to bring, I'm going to take 3 minutes, just bring in a few perspectives from the national stage to just complement a lot that we've heard today. Councilmember Menon appropriately referenced the citizenship question. And I just wanted to flag, when the Supreme Court ruled against it, they ruled against it being included for the reason it was included. They did not rule against it being included ever. As a matter of fact, they gave a roadmap of how to include it. And I'm just saying this to say we need to be vigilant. It's not just going to be a potential law. It's also an administration that has a roadmap of how to include it. So there is a very good chance that we will see it. And as we think through this, especially in our city with a huge immigrant population, we need to think through what that means. And I think that's where your question around how do you speak to communities really, really is important. And thank you, Lurie, also for your remarks on that. We cannot go into communities and just say it's important to show up. Now, I 100% believe it's important to show up. I believe data is resistance. I think we need to make sure our communities show up, but we need to also be honest with them. And we need to have conversations with them about what we're seeing and what the risks are. Now, I'm not just saying that to be negative, because there's good news. It's going to sound like really weird good news, but I promise it's good news. This is 2025. All the stuff going on is going on right now. That means that as we see people plunder and pillage public data, they have A, not yet gone to the Census Bureau, and knock on wood, won't go after that data. But B, we can see how people stand up for privacy and for public data. So if anything, we're going to see a resistance that comes up and says, no, that data that's given to the government for public good is for public good and not private plunder. And with that, when we see that resistance, then when we go into the communities in 2027, 28, 29, and most importantly, 2030, we can point to that. And when we say Title 13, it protects your data, we will hopefully, knock on wood, have that evidence to show that people stood up to say, no, we do not give out these data. So I think that's our opportunity. And I do think what Joe said is right. We also need to calibrate based on who we're speaking to. Some people will make the decision to risk, to have that risk, but we can't say there is no risk because we know what world we all live in. So just throwing that out there. The other thing I'm just going to put food for thought is our most undercounted communities are also our most underserved communities, right? So in some ways, it's a report card on how well we're doing in serving our communities. So we need to make sure we keep building in our communities for all services, not just about taking the census or filling out the census, but making sure we're building communities that we are then able to tap into those trusted messengers. So it's a big day today. We have our own event virtually starting at 1 p.m., our roadmap to 2030. It has a bunch of other information about what's going on nationally, what steps we're taking between now and 2030 to make sure everyone gets counted. I'm sure you have nothing else to do today but talk about census all day. But if you want to join us at 1 p.m. from 1 to 2:30, we have some great speakers lined up there as well. And it's really been a pleasure being in this room. So thank you, Jeff, for putting this day together.
Thank you, Mita. Our next panel, our program, was there a question for Mita? Well, let's just do it from here if we could.
From the residents, when you rent the residence, you don't have to answer whether they're citizens or not. There's a citizen question, nobody has to. And that is a problem. We see that as a problem in getting an accurate count of those residents of the city. They're not citizens. None of us have to.
Okay, thank you. You want to comment on that? Mita?
I think what we need to make sure it's done in the context of ensuring as a whole that we our trust that these data are
Okay, thank you. Well, that will bring up our last panel, and I'll just mention that after this panel completes its presentation, we will hear from Councilmember Menon again about next steps and what you could all be doing. So I urge you to stay till the end. I'm now going to bring up Lucia Gomez, the political director of the New York City Central Labor Council, who will moderate a panel with a few census veterans and instructors, including Steve Romalewski from the CUNY Graduate Center, John Malenkov from the Community Graduate Center, Wendy Chin from New York Immigration Coalition, Eve Stotland from the New York Community Trust, Juan Rosa from NALEO, and Farron Griffith from the NAACP. So, see ya.
So while folks get settled in, I just want to give a quick story of what it's like to be now embedded in the Census family. And I would say you never get out. So in 1998, my first job out of the box was with the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. And I applied for the education associate position, but I ended up doing fundraising in college, so they got me as a development associate. I hate fundraising. I think they noticed that, but the one thing they noticed is that I love databases. I love Excel spreadsheets, so I ran that database for fundraising like a champ. As a result, I had the opportunity to meet the late Angelo Falcon, who had just merged with the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. I knew I wasn't going to do that. Okay. We had just merged with the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, and he ran the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy. He saw how much I love data and numbers, and we got this and these many people, and managed that guest list like a champ. So he asked me to run the Census 2000 project at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. I was like, census, numbers, math, people, energy, loved it, sucked it all up. 1999, I ran the project in 8 states, Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands, and the first event that he made me host, he made me put in these envelopes a button that says, no dejes que te cojan de pendejo. Pa'lante con el censo 2000. Don't let them, and it's a rude word, pendejo for some populations, but for Angelo, it was like, don't let them take you as a sucker. Go forward with Census 2000 and let's stop the Latino undercount. And it was something that was used throughout the entire program that we did. I ended up doing a 2010 and then a 2020 version of the damn PIN. But the reality is that I never thought that it was that big of a deal. Like, I didn't know. It was like, wow, census. I became all things census, all thing not letting, anyone take us for granted as communities. And I just want to say, if you're here, it's because you're at that level of not letting anyone take us as suckers and making sure that our communities are going to have the agenda they need to push forward and push through these next couple of years as we try to implement a 2030. And we will implement a 2030. We implemented a 2020 the way we did, the way we had to shift and make things happen. And I think this panel is going to talk much more of the ways that we're going to, we learn from the past and we forge ahead to the future and be nimble, because we're gonna need to be in collective action. And I want you to put your organizer's hat right now, because everything I think from an organizer's lens. And that's what we're going to need, a room full of organizers. So in honor of the late Angelo Falcon, who left us way too early, I want to thank all of you for being the next generation of census champions. So thank you. Okay. And I knew I was going to cry because there's no way not to. Okay. I want to invite up Steve Romoleski. He's our Director of Mapping Services over at the Center for Urban Research at CUNY.
Yeah.
While he's setting up, just for context and background, so National Coalition of Funders and Stakeholders that Mita referred to asked our team at the CUNY Graduate Center for Urban Research.
It will be.
To analyze and map nationwide, areas that were the hardest to count communities, the stakeholders could prioritize their outreach efforts, both in 2010 and again in 2020 and going forward to 2030. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that all showed for our strategy. So just to step back and provide some context, I think it's important to, you may have been familiar with this already, so my apologies if it's redundant, but to understand how the census counts us, because that frames the challenges and how we can overcome those challenges to ensure that there's a fair and accurate count in 2030. So there are two phases of the count for every decennial census. There's the self-response phase, where in New York City, the Bureau sends a mailing to every household and most other households around the country. They're likely going to do that again for 2030. We don't know exactly their operational plans, but that's likely going to happen. In 2020, we had 3 ways of responding. You as the householder could go online, you could send it in by mail, or you can call in the information by phone. And the Census Bureau, based on their analysis, says that that's the most robust and reliable data that they collect during that self-response phase when you fill out the questionnaire on your own. But not everyone does that. Not every household does that. And so the Census Bureau's charge is to count everyone. So they know, and I should point out that the address list that Joe and Joel talked about, that's what the Census Bureau mails to. And so they know if you don't self-respond. And so the next phase is called the non-response follow-up phase, when the Bureau hires a small army of people around the country and here in New York City to knock on your door if you didn't self-respond and try to ask you the census questionnaire right then and there. That's very expensive, that's very challenging, and according to the Census Bureau's analysis, that's where people tend to be missed entirely or counted inaccurately, and that's the greatest risk of undercount. So the Bureau tracks this information closely, and they use 2 similar but and related, different but related measures to understand what that means. So the self-response rate is what they track during the census collection effort. So basically, it's the number of households that send back their questionnaire on their own divided by that comprehensive address list. But as I think maybe Joe and Joel talked about, that address list can include vacant addresses and other addresses that shouldn't be on there for whatever reason. The Census Bureau doesn't know yet what addresses are vacant until they actually do the count. And so after the census is done, the Bureau in effect cleans up that address list and comes up with a slightly different measure called the return rate. This is a little bit in the weeds, but it's important to keep in mind because we use these measures very extensively throughout the stakeholder community to, again, understand what areas are most important to prioritize, where they're going to be hardest to count. The return rates, because they are a measure of occupied households, the households that could have self-responded, that's a truer measure of census self-participation. But during the census, all we have is the self-response rates. So the interactive map that we created on a nationwide basis, which you can see here, zoomed into New York State, we developed ahead of the 2020 census using the return rates from 2010. And we highlighted the return rates that had the lowest rates by census tract nationwide. You can see those in the yellow to red areas on the map. If you zoom into New York, you can see that much of New York is hard to count. The yellow to red areas show where at least 25% of households in 2010 needed to be counted in person. And in some places that percentage was much higher. And so that's hard. We could talk about what the patterns are, what they mean, and some expected or unexpected patterns. But for purpose of moving on, I'll go through the rest of the slides. So how did we do in 2020 in terms of the self-response rates and the return rates? And I should mention, I think Joe and Joel touched on this, but the Census Bureau doesn't provide undercount measures at a local level. So these are in effect proxies for areas at greatest risk of being undercounted. So in New York State, the state's self-response rate was about the same in 2020 as it was in 2010, just about 64%. That was in the bottom half of all states nationwide, 31 out of 50. Minnesota had the highest rate, just above 75%. Alaska had the lowest rate, about 55%. And you can see that the patterns, this is by census tract across the state, were uneven. The yellow to orange areas are where the self-response rate was less than 50%. So 50% or more households had to be counted, hopefully, in person. The blue areas were 50% or more households self-responded. So the need to door knock was less. In New York City, there was some cheerleading before, which is important, about how well we did in terms of the self-response rate, but the reality is a bit more bracing. So in 2010, I don't know what the Census Bureau expected us to do in 2020, but we know that in 2010, the self-response rate was 64%. So our self-response rate in 2020 was 2 full percentage points less than what it was in 2010. And you can see that the results, the self-response rates are uneven across the city. Some areas, the rates were less than 50%, meaning, again, more than half the households had to be counted in person. But other areas did very well in terms of self-response. So now that the census is complete, the Census Bureau has begun to come up with, again, the truer measure of census self-participation, the return rates. So this shows the blue areas are what the yellow and red areas were on the earlier map, the areas that had the lowest 2010 return rates. This shows the orange areas, the tracts in New York City that had the lowest return rates in 2020. Now, I should point out that the Bureau has published this information. We noticed some methodological issues with how they calculated the return rates. And so we've pointed that out to them. We've had extensive discussions with them. So they're improving that, they're updating that, and they'll be publishing that corrected information soon, we hope. I think the overall patterns, though, probably will be in the main the same. And here's the overlap with a bigger map showing the overlap. And you can see that it's almost one-to-one. The areas with low census self-participation in 2010 were also, by and large, those same areas in 2020. And so these persistently low census self-participation areas, it's important to note that, some people will say, well, you can't compare one census to another because the whole environment was totally different. In 2010, there was really no online option to speak of. There was no pandemic, of course. In 2020, there was an online option, various differences. But the point of this map is that these areas had low return rates despite those differences. And so what I think that means for us, the stakeholders, and also equally importantly for the Census Bureau, is that we need to take a close look at these communities, better understand why they tend to not want to participate and fill out the census questionnaire. And the reasons are varied. I'm sure we know a lot of them, but to really hone in and make an extra effort to boost self-response. The way I think of the 2010 effort is that because of all the funding that was provided in New York City for outreach, and my colleague John will talk about that in a moment, it would have been a large-scale social experiment to see if all of that funding really would have boosted self-response or the return rates. Because of the pandemic, we don't really know. But hopefully, we can do that again and really boost these rates and change things. If we don't, otherwise, these communities will risk for the third decade in a row being saddled with census data that is incomplete and or inaccurate And that will cause these communities, which many of us are from, to lose out on fair political representation, their fair share of federal funding, and more. So that's the challenge. I hope we all rise to the occasion. Let me pass it. Thank you. Let me pass it to John Mollenkoff, and he could talk about some of the work in the outreach.
Two interesting facts about me. My first job in New York City in 1980 was being a division director at the Department of City Planning. And there's a kind of invisible college of former members of the department, like Joe, who cast a great deal of influence in various spheres. And I would say, in terms of return on investment, if DOGE starts to look at the Department of City Planning, they'll realize it's the greatest return on investment of any agency in New York City, because they've brought billions of dollars to the city based on just a few people working in that office. So I want to thank you for all your efforts. In 2020, New York City put more money into a complete count than any other jurisdiction, any other city in the country. Other cities like Chicago and Los Angeles launched efforts, but they were a mere fraction of what New York City did. As Councilmember Menon mentioned earlier, the total budget was $40 million, and about half of that, $19 million, was spent on providing funds to community-based trusted partner organizations in New York City. And I was asked to be on the selection committee that evaluated the various proposals from community groups to see where the money should be allocated. And one point I want to make is that you can see from where the money went and where the boots on the ground from the organizations were. That overlaps very closely with the previous maps that you've seen about where hard to count areas are. This was a really creative and fruitful partnership, and I hope in 2030 there will be another partnership between the City University of New York and the city's efforts, because I want to take my hat off to Colette Labrador. I don't think she's here, but she ran the CUNY administrative effort that got the grants out to all these organizations, executing the contracts through the City University Research Foundation. And we had 200 students that we recruited to be a census corps that were allocated to a lot of these organizations to help their field efforts. One point of concern is, well, 2 points of concern, actually. People made a lot of plans to do field work that's similar to the canvassing that happens in political campaigns. Various kinds of outreach to get people involved in the census. And of course, we didn't anticipate that COVID was going to rear its ugly head in March of 2020 and cause almost all of these organizations that had very well-developed plans to completely change what they were going to do, because a lot of it was planned on outreach to the members and the neighborhoods of these organizations. The roughly 150, roughly speaking. The grants range from relatively small amounts like $35,000 up to $125,000 or $150,000. So these were significant efforts at the community base to engage the neighborhoods. And all these organizations had to pivot to doing indirect contact of one sort or another, like texting, like reaching out through social media and so on. The one concern that I have is that we weren't able to test how effective the different approaches were. We knew generally what the effort was, but we didn't know exactly where the messages were being received or how much difference they made in terms of what people are doing. So the one piece of advice that I would have for 2030 is to think about how to learn from the process as to which modalities of community-based outreach we do, which ones are more successful than the others. And that would require gathering more data on exactly what the funded organizations do and where they do it. And because of the disruption of COVID, we weren't really able to do that. So it was a lost opportunity. But next time around, we should even think about setting up some experiments as to comparing neighborhoods that are very similar, and one of which gets a kind of treatment and the other which doesn't. And then afterwards, we can see how much difference that made, and we can learn from that about which techniques we should emphasize in future years. But stepping back, it was an unparalleled effort compared to any other city in the country. And I think, the bottom line is we did a lot better than we might have, or we thought we would have, or the Census Bureau thought we would have. So even though we don't know exactly how we did it, we did do it. So my hat's off to everyone who participated in that. Thanks.
Okay, I want to invite up Juan Ignacio Rosa. He is the Director for Civic Engagement over at the National Association for Latino Elected and Appointed Officials.
First of all, Lucia, I love that you're like one of the only people that always calls me by my middle name as well, which is my family always calls me Juan Ignacio. They never call me Juan. So it always warms my heart that you do that. Good afternoon, I think. Well, good morning, everyone. Lucia mentioned Juan Rosa, National Director of Civic Engagement with the NALEO Educational Fund. NALEO, as Lucia also mentions, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. We are a national organization founded in 1976 to promote better public service from the growing number of Latino elected and appointed officials. The Educational Fund was founded in 1981 to mobilize the community to take part in America's civic processes, mainly naturalization for the Latinos who are eligible to become citizens to pursue citizenship, and also for Latinos to be represented in elections, so our electoral campaigns. And our census work, which we've been leading national outreach campaigns since 1994 under the banner of Hágase Contar, Make Yourself Count. So for the 2020 census, we were part of that cohort of organizations that Professor Mollenkoff talked about, that director, now Councilwoman Menin also talked about, led by folks like Mita Anand, who did amazing work getting 150 organizations to coordinate activities, to coordinate actions, and to not sort of duplicate around the city and really try to touch every corner of the city. It really was a beautiful effort. Before I go into my actual presentation, a beautiful effort. And quite frankly, COVID disrupted what would have been an amazing civic infrastructure that got formed around the census. And the idea was always to kind of move that along and create a permanent civic infrastructure in the city that did get disrupted because of the pandemic and because I think a lot of energy around that time also went to the racial reckoning we had after the murder of George Floyd. Those things really disrupted, I think, what would have been a permanent infrastructure that works to create more civic participation in the city. So getting off my soapbox, what worked in 2020 from our point of view? One, it was the integration of national and local efforts. So Census Counts, the Census Counts Coalition, was really replicated all throughout the nation, and it was led nationally by folks like the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. And the learnings that we were acquiring at the national level were being turnkeyed into local communities, state infrastructures, and that was a very successful integration, again, from sort of national efforts to localized and statewide efforts. So again, hats off to Mita, who led that here in New York. The other thing that worked, the other ingredient that worked in 2020 was also meaningful and effective partnerships. So there was a lot of partnering among CBOs, between CBOs and institutions, between governments and local institutions. I do want to remark the work that was done by Councilwoman Menon when she was the director of the Census Office and her deputy, Amit Baga, because not only did they bring community organizations to the table, they actually allowed those organizations to lead. They made the rules that had to be followed, but they never sort of tried to lead that effort. The effort was truly led by the organizations that were around the table. Those organizations were advising the city on the tactics that worked, on the messaging that worked. It was a truly diverse coalition of organizations. I remember Mita Anand saying at one meeting, I think at city planning, by the way, and Mita said, we have to understand what are unknown unknowns here and what are not known unknowns. And I still use that. I always tell my teams when I'm working with them, what are unknown unknowns about this process? And why Mita was asking that, it was because her question was always, who is not at this table? Which community is not being represented by the groups around this table, by the people around this table, by the messaging that we are putting forth, by the tactics that we're implementing. I think that was successful. Again, I call it meaningful and effective partnerships, quick to action, and that really led to the success. I think Professor Mollenkopf talked about that switcheroo that we had to do between on the ground sort of canvassing, traditional political kind of outreach to more digital work. And a lot of the success that the city had, and again, maintaining our response rate, not falling under what we previously had, but actually going above that, was that because of those partnerships, we're able to still talk to our community. So for example, I remember very clearly sending boxes on boxes of materials to Maria Lizardo at her home in Yonkers, full of census swag, so that she could give them out at the food pantries in Washington Heights. This is one example of how, again, that ongoing partnership really translated into quick action when the time came that we needed that, and that's when we were pulled off the field because of the COVID pandemic. The other ingredient I think that was successful in 2020 was the identification and empowerment of trusted messengers. NALEO led research that determined that for Latinos, at least for Latinos, folks who are associated with health, hospitals, clinics, and folks who are associated with youth, learning, education, schools, were the most trusted messenger types for the Latino community. So as a result, not only were we going out in the whole country, and certainly here in New York City, talking to groups about, go talk to the doctors in your community, get them to talk about census, go talk to your schools, make sure the parent coordinator knows what the hell the census is, make sure that your district superintendent understands that they should be putting messaging out in their weekly emails to the schools. We ourselves, NALEO Education, funded a lot of that work, and in fact, the last event that we were scheduled to do before we were sent home because of the pandemic was a training with then State Assemblymember Robert Rodriguez in School District 5 in East Harlem. That was the last event that we were supposed to be doing. The last event we did was for Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, also training school-based staff on why the census matters, right? So we identified those, and again, that was for the Latino community. Other communities did the same, where they did the research and found who were the trusted, credible messengers and empower those messengers. And then the last ingredient, I think, that led to our success in 2020 was how quickly we were able to pivot it. Because of all the other ingredients that I mentioned above, we were very quick to pivot from a field program, which Professor Mollenkopf rightly said, most of the program is supposed to be field, traditional canvassing. We switched it to a majority of it online, social media, digital advice, a lot of Zoom, a lot of Zoom. I was Zoomed out, a lot of Zoom. And so I see a lot of folks with the same reaction. Too much Zoom in 2020, 2021. But the success of the program, again, was that it was very quick to pivot to a mainly online format. I will now say what are some, besides everything you heard here today, the addition of a citizenship question. And by the way, to the gentleman who was on the numerator who asked earlier about this, the problem with, at least for the Latino community, when you put a citizenship question, is that a significant number of Latinos live in mixed status homes. You could have U.S. citizens living side by side with LPRs, lawful permanent residents, but also undocumented residents. And people protect their own. Families protect family, right? So if a family member thinks that they are going to put someone at risk in their household by answering a government questionnaire, guess what they're going to do? They're not going to skip the question. They're just not going to send the questionnaire. So as a result, the Latino community had 5% undercount in the 2020 census. Not in New York, at the national level, 5% undercount of the Latino community. It is the highest that it has been since, I believe, the 1880s. And some of that is attributed, of course, to the pandemic and the disruptions that it caused, but to the national conversation around the existence of a citizenship question on the questionnaire. So I just wanted to kind of say that. And before I get off, I want to identify some of the challenges for 2030 beyond what was identified here earlier today. One, there is increased mistrust in institutions. People are not trusting government. They're not trusting the media. They're not trusting elected officials. And worse than that has kind of always been there, right? American society has always had a healthy distrust of government. That's why we had held a whole independence war to break away from institutions. But since the pandemic, there's also a mistrust or a distrust of expertise, of expert voices, of scientists, of people who speak facts and figures. That is going to be work that we're going to have to tackle from now if we want to make 2030 work. Distrust in institutions and distrust in the voices of experts. The other item that we're going to have to tackle, and the Naleo Educational Fund is an organization that works very closely with media partners, especially Latino media partners, is a completely changed media landscape going to 2030 and a completely changed media consumption habits. Families are not coalescing on the TV anymore to watch the news or watch the telenovela or watch anything. People are getting the information from different sources. So we're going to have to tackle, as we go to 2030, that disruption of the way people consume media and information. And Lucia, the last one, I swear, before I get off, is the last challenge that we're going to have to tackle is the fatigue that is being caused on our communities by the national public conversations going on at this moment around government accessing records to the IRS, governments accessing records through any number of agencies, the dismantling of Social Security. There is a lot of fatigue out in the communities about government. So in 2030, we're all going to go out there and say, trust the government. It's here for you. And guess what? We're going to find a lot of cold shoulders, and we have to get that work done now. Thank you for being in this room. Thank you for the invitation, Lucia and Jeff.
Hey, I want to invite up Wenny Chen, Senior Director of Community and Civic Engagement at the New York Immigration Coalition.
Hi, everyone. Because Juan is a hard act to follow, I'm just going to ad lib so I don't have to repeat everything that was already said. To introduce myself again, my name is Wenny Chin. I am the Senior Director of Community and Civic Engagement at the New York Immigration Coalition. At the New York Immigration Coalition, we were the convener of New York Counts 2020, which was the statewide coalition that really did a lot of the census work. Many of you guys were all part of, so snaps to you. I would be remiss not to give some flowers out now that I have the mic. You know, obviously many here, Mita Anand was kind of very foundational in our census work. But I also want to give flowers to another special someone in the room that we have not heard from today. This individual actually came to the NYC in 2018 and was like, there's a citizenship question. They sounded the alarms. There's a citizenship question and we need to do something about it. The census, it's going to be catastrophic. And that individual actually led and really kickstarted a lot of our budget advocacy at the NYC and New York Counts 2020. So I really want to just give some flowers to Elizabeth Oyang in the room. I know thank you. I know when we talk about the census, we talk about 2020 and 2019, but a lot of the census advocacy and work actually started way before then. So if you were doing census work in 2017 and 2018, give yourselves a big round of applause. First of all, I just want to say it's crazy that we are talking about the census in 2025 and that we are all still here. I genuinely thought that everyone was going to check out after 2020. That was so brutal. But I just want to, since Juan had already walked us through that big picture of 2020, I just want to take a step back and think about what we did well and what we should continue to do. Number one, that is invest in service providers. We saw that in 2020, when COVID hit, a lot of the organizing plans, a lot of the canvassing, I myself did a lot of training on the van and was really stoked that we would go door to door and everywhere in New York City. That didn't end up happening. But what we ended up doing was really relying on kind of organizations who were already in the community doing service-oriented work to pick up that gap. And so I want to shout out NIMIC for doing some of the food pantry support in Upper Manhattan. I want to shout out Minkwon for doing GeoTV in Flushing and Corona during those times, and really making sure that we don't forget the service providers in 2030 to make sure that we're building those relationships, libraries, food pantries, legal service clinics, et cetera, that really hold that relationship and we should continue to leverage. Two is do cool things. Every idea you have, just go and do it. I mean, we saw a ton of really cool videos at the top of today's meeting. Those were super cool. Cardi B talked about the census. I would have never thought, but here she is making a whole video about the census. At the NYC, we did a robocall with the Nets and with the Buffalo Bills and with Whoopi Goldberg. And I was like, oh, no one's going to care. And then I go on Twitter back when it was cool and called Twitter. And people were tweeting that Whoopi Goldberg gave them a call. And I was like, oh, I guess that is cool. So every idea you have, just go and do it. There's no dumb idea. And it will reach someone. And number three is be flexible. We had so many great plans. We spent so many months training, and we knew when COVID hit that those were sunk costs, and we needed to pivot, and we pivoted. And it was really important that we were able to do that, because had we stuck to kind of our original plans, we might have lost more than one seat. So always making sure that when we are looking into 2030, that we remember that no plan is solid. We didn't know in 2020 that TikTok was going to pop off. We didn't have a social media plan, but we really adapted that social media plan once we were all in lockdown. So always remembering to be flexible. Number four is stay in community. What we really saw New York Counts really work was that we were a unified voice. Because the Census Bureau were changing so many of their guidances and adapting as we were all adapting from COVID, what we saw was that being able to have a central hub to receive this information was really critical, making sure that we limit the amount of misinformation and disinformation that penetrated our communities, and really making sure, I remember New York Counts had a daily digest. Big props to the team at the NYC, really Meta, for really facilitating that daily digest and making sure that we were sharing each of our resources, and also making sure that we were addressing all of the new problems we were seeing with the census. I remember it was like a very fun July day where we learned that there was like a last minute 11th hour memo that they were not going to count immigrants in certain communities. I remember there was a whole debacle and there was so much fear that summer on top of everything we were fighting. But what was really great was that folks knew to go to the NYC or New York Counts 2020 and to go to these trusted messengers and be like, what is the update? What should we be telling our community? And it's really important that we continue to invest in that unified voice because we know, to Juan's point, that the mistrust is there, that there are going to be more misinformation, and we need to make sure that we're proactive in combating that. 5 is don't forget what works, and that is our civics infrastructure. I know we didn't get to do that hardcore canvassing in 2020, but it works. And everyone here that does civic engagement work knows that there's nothing that can replace face-to-face relational organizing. So we should continue to invest and build out that face-to-face relational organizing. Make those canvassing plans now. Do those canvassing trainings with NYCET now and get your organizations ready to hit the ground running. And then also do the testing with John that John had mentioned about which tactics work the best. So we'll make sure we get the data so that we can say it proudly with our chest. And lastly, we need to have, to Juan's point again, look around the room and see who's missing, what voices we need to uplift within our own communities. We need to identify the known unknowns, but we also need to identify the known knowns. Thinking about the immigrant community has been heavily attacked with the census, but there's another community we didn't really talk about that much today, and that is the trans and gender nonconforming community. The census and the complete erasure of folks who are in that spectrum. We need to think about where they are in our own communities and how we can develop tactics to reach into and really uplift folks that the census will proactively erase. And addressing those questions now head on and bringing folks into the table and having a seat at the table is incredibly important. I know that at NYC and at New York Counts 2020, our focus was making sure that New York City was going to have a huge infrastructure, but also making sure that outside of New York City, where we didn't have an amazing New York City Census office, also received support. And folks within the immigrant communities in other regions also got to receive some of our resources, received our messaging, and made sure that we were developing partnerships outside of the 5 boroughs. So I really want to encourage you all to make sure that we're not just hyper-focusing on New York City, but also thinking beyond that. And then there's so much about census I want to say. I want to say, looking ahead, what is there to do? After New York Counts 2020, we sunsetted our website, but I do want to show, in 2023, we actually relaunched. We are now rebranded as NewYorkCounts.org. So at any time, if you want to tap into all of the resources that have been created over the past few years, please do visit NewYorkCounts.org. And we hope that this will be the organizing vehicle and the resource hub for everyone in the state as we walk into 2030. So make sure to stay plugged. Go to the tab that says Get Updates and sign up now.
Just a quick time check. We started a little late, so we're just going to go over about 10, 15 minutes. So I just want to make sure folks, stay put if you can. So I want to invite up Eve Stotlin, Program Director over at the New York Community Trust.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and happy Census Day. I am Eve Stotlin. I'm Program Director for Democracy and Human Justice at New York Community Trust, which is a place-based funder. We fund in the 8 downstate counties, Westchester, the 5 New York City counties, Long Island, Suffolk, and Nassau on Long Island. And I am not a census veteran, but I understand that since this is my first census, it will not be my last, right? There's no going back, right? I've entered for the rest of my living days. And And I am speaking on behalf of an institution and some predecessors who did amazing work, big shoes to fill at New York Community Trust. So it's my first census, but it's not the Trust's first census. And I want to do a quick shout out to some people. Pat Swan, who many of you know. Everything I have to say here today is from Pat Swan, Sol Maria Alfonso Jones, Lisa Fasola Frischman, Maria Matola, and the group at Engage New York. So they gave me these talking points today. I put my own spin on them, but really this was their work because, as I said, I joined the Trust about 6 years ago. And I want to communicate that it is philanthropy's duty. I think I'm here today in part to speak on behalf of philanthropy, and it is absolutely philanthropy's duty to help nonprofits integrate census into their work. And some philanthropies may feel that census work, because it relates to redistricting, is too political. And I want to say it is not political. It is democratic, meaning it is a foundation, the foundation of our democracy. And it's not a party. It has nothing to do with party politics. And foundations do not have to be, or donors in general do not have to be, should not be afraid to fund census outreach. Whether it's LUCA or door knocking or research or any other part of this endeavor of getting a correct count. And I would love to show a video. Now, when I decided that we would include this video, I did not know that I'd be competing with Cardi B and Alicia Keys. So this is not that kind of video, but I think it will show you what funders did statewide in 2019 and 2020 through the New York State Census Equity Fund.
One, two, three. Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Hey, New York!
Cada neoyorquino merece ser contado.
Всеки трижавянин заслужива да се брои.
Oh, is that camera on?
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Every kid deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker
deserves to be counted.
Chaque New Yorker mérite pour y compter.
Every New Yorker
deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted. Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Każdy Nowojorzczyk powinien się liczyć.
Every New Yorker.
Every New Yorker.
Every New Yorker
Deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker
Deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted. Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
deserves to be counted.
Deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
Every New Yorker
Deserves to be counted. Every New Yorker deserves to be counted.
All of the donors in 2020. And find it on New York Community Trust, New York State Fund Land. So that is not Cardi B, but hopefully a really great visual video representation of really the first time that funders in New York State got together across the regions to do a collaborative campaign on any topic. And it's very exciting that that topic was the census. So I'm going to speak just briefly to the questions I was given today, what worked, what didn't work, and what are we going to do differently this time around. So some things that worked. Again, the 2020 statewide Census Equity Fund was the first time philanthropy came together on a statewide campaign. And with the census, we sink or swim. I think we heard a little bit about that today. And a New York City only approach is great for New York City, but doesn't actually get even New York City everything that we need and want here. And of course, we are part of New York State. So every region of the state had a donor represented in 2020. We split the state into 5 regions: New York City, Long Island, Hudson Valley, Central New York, and Western New York. And we had donors from each one. Each region did not have the same wealth in terms of philanthropy, and that didn't matter. Everybody who put in to the collaborative had a decision-making role in the collaborative. And we didn't pull rank based on how much money people had put in. That's not a good way to do collective work. People from downstate regions made personal visits to funders outside of the city and Long Island and the Hudson Valley in order to get buy-in and really build those trusting relationships. As a result, we raised $3.6 million from almost 40 donors across the state and made 131 grants, mostly to small BIPOC-led nonprofits. And I know that that $3.6 million seems so small compared to the $40 million that the city put in. But given that state funding was very slow to come and in some instances never came, that $3.6 million, we believe, made a real difference, especially outside of the city. Something else we did that really worked was we commissioned an evaluation that memorialized what happened, what worked, what didn't work, and what we should do better. And we will certainly do that again. So what didn't work? Well, the funders launched the New York State Census Equity Fund in 2018, and that was really too late. And it didn't give us time to create an aligned strategy and talking points for government within philanthropy. And it didn't give us time to align our message with other stakeholders like nonprofits, researchers, and businesses, sometimes meaning that we were running on parallel tracks or even getting in each other's way. So what will we do differently for 2030? First of all, we never stopped meeting. We have something called the New York State Census Working Group, and it began meeting and preparing for 2030 in 2021. And this group includes philanthropy, nonprofits, and researchers. And if you're interested in joining it, please just reach out to me. And I'm really pleased to announce today that New York Community Trust will again be hosting a statewide census equity fund in 2030, announcing 5 years before the actual census. Our goal is to make our first round of grants in 2027 for 4 years of grant making. And thank you. We aim to surpass the $3.6 million we raised the last time around and to get it out of the door even earlier. And we're excited to work with all of you to make the 2030 census a success. Thank you so much.
It really is never too early to strive, right? When my daughter was a year old, her birthday theme was never too early to strive for 2025. She's 18 now, and that was the day that she would be eligible to register and vote back in the day. So she had her little theme where it's never too early. Okay, last speaker, last but not least, Farine Griffith. She is the Civic Engagement Director for the NAACP New York branch and the census captain for New York City.
Thank you, Lucia. Again, my name is Farine Griffith, and I am the Civic Engagement Chair at the New York branch NAACP. In addition, I was the census captain for the New York City branches during the 2020 census. I just want to definitely give a shout out to Liz. Thank you, Winnie, for mentioning Liz, Mita. And I want to say that for the NAACP, as you know, we're the oldest civil rights organization, and our membership base is Black Americans, right? And we know the Black community is not trusting of the government. So that was a big challenge for the Black community, is how can we trust the government to answer these responses? So we have organizations like the Center for Law and Social Justice, which the Executive Director, Louis Daniel Favors, is here today, that they start to make sure that the Black community is counted. They start every census in the year ending in 7. So in 2017, they began their, 5 this year, okay. But usually it was 7. So we started in 2017 outreaching to Black communities to get people on board. Yes, mentioning the census, the citizenship question, because not only, yes, it's the large Hispanic community, but there is a lot of African diaspora and Caribbeans in Brooklyn and in Harlem and in all 5 boroughs, to be honest. So that was there was a lot of engagement around that advocacy to make sure that the Black community is counted. And then after that, we went into, we transitioned into New York Counts 2020. I was on the steering committee. I was also the co-chair for outreach and organizing, led by New York Immigration Coalition. So there's a lot of history in this room. A lot of us worked together for several years. And throughout that, I was able to bring in, it was 250, winning about 250 organizations statewide. So, the NAACP, with our partnerships through Divine Nine, sororities and fraternities, and some of the Baptist churches and other clergies, we were able to get them on board and join the New York Counts 2020 coalition. Some were granted, gifted grants to help do the outreach and engagement. And then after that, we come into right before the pandemic. A good friend who's in this room, the partnership specialist for the Census Bureau, Nicole Yearwood, who's here. She says, Farine, all of the stuff that you're doing, everything that you're involved in, all the boards, you need to start a complete count committee. So I started a complete count committee in Harlem specifically, because that's where I reside at. And we had clergy, we had public schools, we had the businesses, we had the Alliance, the bids. We had all of the different organizations that receive funding, the ones that actually receive federal funding, joined the Complete Count Committee. We were hosting events at their facilities, like a PAL, the YMCA, the Children's Aid Society. So those places that were already receiving funding, they were eager and open to having us table, and through the CUNY program with the interns that we had assigned to us through the city census funding that we were a grantee for. I had the 2 interns with me on the road, like they were my kids, and we were at every single event, whether it was a farmer's market, whether it was a town hall event. We were in every single location. But I wear a lot of hats in my community. So I'm on the DYCD Neighborhood Advisory Board. I'm on the Precinct Council, the hospital board in my community. And I leverage my personal relationships to make sure that my immediate community was counted. In addition to me being the census captain for the 5 boroughs for the NAACP Metro Council of Branches, specifically at where I live at, I was making sure that my relationships was going to build out and make sure that the community was counted, because I am a trusted voice in my community. And trusted voices is very key in outreaching and engaging, because the messenger, in my personal opinion, is much more important than the message. Is who's saying it and how they're saying it is how it's going to be received. And then after that, we come into the pandemic. And as Juan said, right, so with all of the virtual, the Zooms, well, actually, with the New York Counts 2020, we've been Zooming since 2018, right, Winnie? We were Zooming early. So we were back into the Zoom. We were doing Instagram Lives. We actually did a census caravan In Harlem, we had about when all of the boroughs did one for the led by the NAACP, but the one in Harlem specifically was led by the Harlem Complete Count Committee, which I chaired, but the branch was included. There's about 53 vehicles. This was June, July in 2020. In the thick of the pandemic, we had the elected officials were involved, the hospital, like everybody took a role in it. And again, I want to shout out to Nicole Yearwood, who was the senior partnership specialist. We mapped out the route based on the low census response, self-responses. So we used that data, and then we had the partners in partnership with the Census Bureau do this to help individuals complete their census. So at each different location, we had balloons, we had made it very festive so people can come and complete their census. So these are the things that we had to pivot to do because we wasn't doing too much engagement, during the peak of the pandemic. Excuse me. The challenges, yes, it was the pandemic. I'm gonna go into the challenges. The challenges was the pandemic, and then I became a numerator, and the challenge there was not being able to access buildings. Like some of the buildings that had doormen or lobby attendants, they wouldn't let you up. But again, I just want to keep saying that, like, using your personal relationships, if you're doing outreach and engagement, is very key. So I had people that were welcoming me into their home because they knew my face from in the community. Oh, I know you, pull your mask. Oh, I know you, come inside, I'll fill it out. People were eager to fill out the form. I was also carrying around the Counting for Dollars. The Counting for Dollars gives a full list of all of the federal programs in each state and how much they get. So here in New York State, Medicaid is the bulk, right? But then there's for after school, for Pell, all of the different programs, food banks, senior centers. So I was leveraging that information when I was at the door. So for people that have kids in public school, if they told me they never filled out the census, I said, oh, so it's your kid that's making the classroom overcrowded because your kid is not counted. You never filled out a census? You're the reason why. Your kid is the one that's making the classroom overcrowded. So, I was really being honest and direct, as everybody knows that I am. So being honest with them and saying, and being that I sat on the other boards, like for DYCD, we directly fund with federal dollars, program services and activities in the communities in the 41 Title I programs around the city. So specifically in Harlem. So I was saying, the PAL, they're giving funding. Your kid goes there for after school for free. The YMCA, the Children's Aid Society, whatever that you're not paying for, someone is paying for it. So I wanted to make sure that they understood that connection. And again, with the trusted voices and saying, I know the government hasn't been good to the Black community, but we understand the hesitation. But for right now, we need to make sure that you're counted so that you can get the services. A lot of the bus routes were discontinued, and I explained to them that was because of ridership. If there's no population showing that people are riding the bus, they're going to cut that, they're going to cut that route. So just tying everything to real, actual life, and it's the same thing with voting. People don't see the importance unless it ties directly to them. So those were some of the things that I did. And the challenges, again, was with the census and not being able to access certain buildings. But looking ahead to 2023, this forum is excellent. We're starting 5 years out. Thank you, Larry, for updating me on the Nick Black that we're going to start in 2025 instead of 2027. Organizations starting and having this type of information in these forums, and building coalitions. So we know in the redistricting, we know we had the Unity Coalition with the Blacks, the Brown, and the Asian communities coming together to make sure that the redistricting process was taking place. So we need to do the same thing for the census. So there's a lot of organizations in this group. There's a lot of familiar faces that I've worked with, but there's some new faces in here. I think I know we're over time, but we need to be networking and building on that right now so that we can move forward and say, hey, I saw you at the event. I know the work that you were doing. Can we partner and start the process now? And then, And then, I'm sorry. The last thing for looking ahead. Oh, that was it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, the networking. Yes, the networking was the last thing. Thank you so much.
I want to thank the panel for great presentations. Because we are tight on time and a little bit over, if you have any questions for them, I'll ask you to address them individually after we end the formal program. And to end the formal program, I invite Councilmember Julie Menon to come back up and provide us with some closing remarks. I'll just say, if aside from what the council member suggests you do as next steps, the state budget is late in Albany. We are seeking some census funding. So if you want to do something right away, you can call Governor Hochul, Senator Stewart Cousins, or Speaker Hasty. Leave messages to please fund the census in the budget. It's a very simple message, but a direct one. I'm going to say thank you all very much and let the council member close out.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And once again, thank you to Jeff. Thank you to New York Law School. Thank you, Lucia, and to the CLC for your incredible partnership and leadership on this. And thank you to all of you. So in terms of next steps, I think this was incredible just to hear from the panel, like, all the work that went into this and all the work that we know needs to happen moving forward. So a next step on the city level, I introduced a bill last week. It's Intro 1225. It is a bill to create a permanent office of the census in New York City and would require the mayor 2.5 years prior to the beginning of a census to get the office up and running, to get it properly resourced, financed, and do a public education campaign. So the ask that I would have is, please, if you could, whether it be through social media or any way, please amplify the importance of Intro 1225. Mercedes from my team, she's over here. She'll stay for a little bit. So if you want extra information on 1225, we can give that to you. But that would be the number one ask I have, because we need to get that bill passed. That is what is going to be the most important on the city level to replicate what we did in 2020. I don't want to wait till a year before the census for whoever the next mayor may be to say, okay, we're going to do this work. We got to start right now and mandate that it's a permanent office. The other thing I would say, I know, Mita, you talked a little bit about this, but on the citizenship case, you made a very good point, which is then the Supreme Court decided the citizenship case. They decided it on administrative law grounds, meaning the ruling that they made said that the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, acted in a so-called arbitrary and capricious way in adding the citizenship question. So by making the ruling in that narrow legal way, it does allow for a new citizenship question to unfortunately reemerge, because if they do follow so-called the roadmap from the case and do not act in an arbitrary and capricious way, we could really be in real trouble there. So that is something we absolutely have to watch. As I told you, the House has a bill to add a citizenship question back onto the census. So we really are going to need to organize around that. And I have to say that's something that keeps me up at night. Just as someone who's been a regulatory attorney for 20 years, is like there's a real vulnerability in how that Supreme Court case was decided. So in closing, please, if you could help on the city level to get us to pass this bill, we'd so appreciate it. Jeff talked about the efforts on the state level, which is great. And we can't thank you enough for being here today. Thanks so much.